Okay, how are we doing here? We're good. Let's talk about the coming food crisis, shall we? So I've been watching that space for a while. The big discussion and worry about the food crisis began shortly after the closing of the Straits of Hormuz by the Trump administration because they had to bomb Iran. Now, for some reason, no one really knows what happened. They didn't realize that bombing Iran was going to close the Straits of Hormuz, and they didn't realize that there's a lot of material that goes through the Straits of Hormuz that are critical to civilization. For example, crude oil. That's one. But also liquefied natural gas, which is used by a lot of countries for industrial purposes, but also for heating and cooking, and also fertilizers. One of the ways you can export natural gas is not to export it as a gas or as a liquid, but to convert it into fertilizer. So, which can be used by every nation that has an agriculture sector, which is most of them. So the Gulf states realize that the cheapest way, actually, to move your natural gas, if that's what you have, is to just convert it into fertilizer. It's not an easy process. It's an industrial process. It requires an industrial facility, a lot of energy, a lot of chemistry, a lot of other stuff. But once you get a product that is a solid, right? That's what fertilizers are, a solid. Then you can just load it onto a cargo ship and ship it wherever you want to. There's nothing else to it. And it's valuable to farmers and nations that have large agricultural sectors. Want this product. They want the artificial fertilizers for their fields. And the longer you use a field, especially if you're doing industrialized agriculture, the longer you use a patch of soil that way, then the more depleted it becomes. And then you become actually more reliant on artificial fertilizers to keep your crop yields up, even just to keep them the same at some point. So some people began noticing that, they've closed the Straits of Hormuz. Oh, that's going to be a problem. Oh, that's a problem for farmers. Wait, we didn't know we were getting most of our fertilizer or a lot of our fertilizer from the Persian Gulf. Really? That came as a shock. Even the farmers didn't know where it was coming from. All they knew is that they weren't getting it, right? So 5 months ago, when this whole thing set off, what was it, February 28th or something like that? So 5 or so months ago, when all this went off, the farmers, especially here in the U.S., they're very conservative, anti-communist, anti-Islam, and so bombing Iran was great, and they were all applauding that until they realized someone told them, finally. Someone told them. Yeah, well, that's your fertilizer supply. So there was pretty early on, after the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, people started doing the math, and they realized, okay, so there are some knock-on effects to this. And one of them was a lack of availability of fertilizer. So pretty much right away, farmers start engaging in the leverage that they have, right? And they were saying things like, well, if we don't have fertilizers, then our crops we can't plant. Now, you might think, hold on. You could plant. I mean, that's separate from fertilizing, right? That's seeds. I know what the difference is between seeds and fertilizer. But what people don't understand is that these agricultural areas have been planted for so long and so hard with industrialized processes that the soil is essentially depleted, as I mentioned earlier. And so the farmers know something that most people don't know, because most people don't know where their food comes from. And the farmers know something about food, okay? And they know there's no reason to plant if you're not going to be able to fertilize, because there's nothing in the soil. There's nothing left in the soil. They're not composting. They're not doing crop rotation. They're not doing anything. If there's no fertilizer, there's no reason to plant. And most people don't understand that, because they don't understand where their food comes from or how that food happens. So the farmers had to start saying some things like, well, If there's not going to be any fertilizer coming out of the Persian Gulf, then, excuse me, we have a problem. We farmers have a problem. Now, for most farmers, and again, this was like 5 months ago, right? Or 4 months ago. It was a little bit of a lag time. And then we started hearing these horror stories. For farmers, not being able to plant a crop means not being able to harvest a crop. Not harvesting means you don't get paid, right? Now, most industrialized nations that have an agricultural sector, I have to keep coming back to that, right? Because this is not uniformly the case. Most industrialized nations that have a agricultural sector understand how that works. And most of them will subsidize their farmers against these kind of financial disasters. And this is actually a good thing. I'm not going to say, it's corruption, whatever. It probably is corrupt, and there probably is waste, and there's giveaways, and there's politics involved, and all that kind of stuff. But in theory, and if done correctly, there is some virtue in not allowing your farmers, your agriculture sector, to go bankrupt just because of a bad turn of events. Every nation has an incentive to make sure that they don't lose their agricultural sector to bankruptcy. Now, this didn't used to be the problem, by the way. I'm talking about modern industrialized agriculture, right? That's where bankruptcies start to matter. There used to be that rather than 3% of the population creating the food, as it is now, it was 90% or even 97% of the population created the food. Everybody had a pasture. Everybody had an orchard or a vineyard or a backyard garden or a herb garden. Everybody was doing this. Unless you're part of the king's court, what are you doing in the king's court? You're clipping the king's toenails. Unless you're that kind of person who is just taken care of, you are in the agricultural sector. And maybe it was animals, and maybe it was bees, and maybe it was, making wine or pressing the olives, but doing, there's some industry involved with even old time agriculture, but everybody was in it. Everybody had to make food. And that didn't mean you were making all your food, but there was enough people in your community, your village, if you rather, who were making food that there would be food. And there would be dairy. So you had specialists doing dairy. I'm trying to make a big deal out of this because it used to be that if one farmer had a problem with their crops, there was probably another farmer a mile away who wasn't. Now, even that did not always work. There could be large-scale famines. For example, the Irish potato famine, when a bacterium, I can't recall now, blight. It's called blight. When the potato blight hit Ireland, and potatoes were a staple, which aren't even Irish, by the way. That got imported, but it doesn't matter where it came from. They were growing a lot, and the blight hit them all. And it was such a big deal that the Irish starved, and those who could, meaning whoever had money, this is going to be a theme. Keep this in mind, right? Whoever had money, ta-da, there you go, could escape the blight and say come to America or go to other parts of England or whatever. So, but that's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that something would just impact an entire agricultural sector. It's important to point out the reason why that was a big deal for the Irish, because they were dependent on that one crop. Now, that is a problem. If you have a properly segmented agricultural system, then you probably have a lot of different types of food. So if there's a blight or a pest or something that impacts something particular in your food supply locally, there maybe you could go to something else. So if there is a potato harvest that's been impacted, that might not be so big a deal because you've still got a wheat harvest or you've still got something else. When you become too dependent on one thing, then that one thing can be knocked out from under you. So that's what kind of happened with the Irish during the potato blight. So there are horror stories from history about how it doesn't always work out. But kind of the assumption is that a well-constructed agricultural community will have enough fallback positions within their small community that a disaster here is not a disaster everywhere, except for now. We don't have any of that resilience. We have depleted our soils so that now fertilizer is a requirement. We're growing a lot of food in places that don't have water. So this is dry land farming. That works if you have seasonable rains that you can count on showing up at the right time, meaning you've put the seed in the ground, 3 days later it rains. Doesn't rain too much, doesn't rain for too long, doesn't rain too hard. Okay, there's still some caveats here, but you planted because you kind of know when the rains are coming. You planted, the rains come, and it's the right kind, and then the plants grow from there. So that's what we call dry land farming. It's timing, and it works. It works. And you can even, if you really know the timing, and the timing is very predictable, then you have a good chance of having a harvest, because the rain might just show up. But industrialized farming doesn't like that model. So what does industrialized farming do? Well, they import water. If it rains, that's okay too, but they import water, and they have huge irrigation projects, probably paid for by the government, but hey, we all got to eat, so we'll allow that. All this water comes in, huge projects, a lot of maintenance, entire government bureaucracies built around these irrigation projects. And then they have water. Well, they need the water because they're growing in basically an arid region, a desert. And a lot of continental interiors are deserts, and the soil might even be really good because nothing much grows there. See, that's the theme. And so if you discover this soil, but it just lacks water, and so you bring in the water with pipeline projects and irrigation projects, then all of a sudden you have abundant crops, provided you have water. And then you deplete the soil. So now you need fertilizer. And now you have water needs and fertilizer needs. That means electricity needs. And now you're doing agriculture, industrialized agriculture. And it's only 3% of the population that's even engaged in this activity. So you've got big tractors, big mechanized footprint, great big huge plows and great big huge seed drills and huge combine harvesters and of course the 18-wheeler truck that has to pull up next to the combine harvester and unloads the wheat or the beans or the soy or whatever into the truck, and then the truck drives hundreds if not thousands of miles, and then there's a warehouse and there's employees that drive with cars to get to the warehouse, and then it has to be processed. The corn has to be made into ethanol, the corn has to be made into corn chips or whatever, and then those are transported another 1,000 miles in another direction, and pretty soon they're on a shelf, and then you drive your car to the market, and you go to the shelf, and there's corn chips, so there's produce, and some of that produce came on a jet from Honduras. Yeah, look at the little stickers on your bananas. Look at the little stickers on your apples. Where'd they come from? Mexico, Ecuador, Honduras, some part of Africa, France, right? And that's industrialized agriculture. So 5 months ago, February, when the Trump administration decided they wanted all the oil in Iran for themselves, and they started bombing Iran to get regime change so they could take the oil, because that's kind of what they were doing, they inadvertently closed the Straits of Hormuz. Now, they figured it was worth it, because they figured, okay, we'll get our regime change, this won't last very long, we'll have a couple of weeks, whatever. Well, that's not what happened. Unlike the Venezuelans, the Iranians have a military, and they have weapon systems. And some of those they got from the Chinese, some of those they got from the Russians, a lot of those they made themselves. In fact, now they're a weapons exporting country. So if you're going to attack a weapons exporting country to steal their oil, you're going to have to deal with weapons. So the Straits of Hormuz have been closed since then. And there's no chance of them being reopened anytime soon, if ever. And so in the meantime, no crude oil, no fertilizer, no nothing. And the war itself is taking a toll on the capability of these nations to even manufacture or export or deal with these products at all. Kuwait, which I think is a source of a lot of fertilizer because they have a lot of natural gas, Kuwait is essentially offline at this point. And even if the Straits of Hormuz were opened up, it would take them years, plural, probably, to bring their facilities back up to speed, and possibly it wouldn't work. It's just possible they can't do it. So I guess. Well, we'll find out, won't we? If anything ever changes, we'll find out. But it turns out things are bad enough right now that farmers the world over, because mechanized agriculture is now a global phenomenon, farmers the world over didn't plant. They don't go bankrupt because the governments will support them in their problem, and the farmers are happy to have the subsidies because they don't go bankrupt. They maintain their equipment and they just don't do anything. And people say, well, it's great that we kept the farmers from going bankrupt. And everybody celebrated the fact that, oh, we still have a farming sector. Oh, we still have farmers. We'll do better next year. But watch what happened. No one had the discussion, although we're having the discussion now, that we saved the farmers and we saved the farms and we saved them from going bankrupt, but we didn't produce the food. Okay? Now, normally, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem because you could go on the open market. All this food ends up on the open market, right? So someone else's product will end up on the open market. The Australians will do well. The Indians will do well. Whatever. The Brazilians will do well. And so their products will end up on the open market. So when our farmers didn't plant, no one really cared because they never bought it from the farmers down the street. They always bought the products that we eat on the open market. That's where your bananas come from. And that's where your wheat comes from, and your corn, and your soy, and your beef, and your poultry, and everything else comes from the open market. So, everyone who manages food supplies, and there's a lot of big companies that do that. These are multinational global companies that produce food. I should know something. ConAgra, right? There's a few others. Tyson Foods. Some of them specialize in meat products, so chickens, pork, beef. Some of them specialize in canned products or prepared products, things you can buy on the shelf in bags, right, like cereals and chips and things like that. But in any case, these are big companies, and they buy the things they are going to use as raw materials on the open market. And then they manufacture the products that we probably buy as consumers. And so the thought was on the part of these big ag companies, well, we'll just go on the open market. And if the farmers in France aren't planting properly, or they just couldn't find the fertilizer, or they couldn't find the money, it doesn't matter because we'll just go and we'll buy Australian wheat, we'll buy soybeans from Brazil, well, whatever, it'll be fine. But here's the problem, and maybe you've noticed this now. Maybe you've noticed this, but for some reason, what's the reason? Are people dumb? Maybe people are just dumb, right? For some reason, no one recognized that globally there was going to be a shortage in fertilizer and crude oil. And globally, farmers were saying we can't plant, or there's no good reason to plant because we can't fertilize, not the way we want to. Globally, there's a water shortage. Globally, not everywhere, okay, but just enough that you can say, oh yeah, it's a global problem. Globally, we were going to have a poor harvest. I think here in the U.S., I heard something a couple of days ago that it kind of shocked me. They're expecting a 50% collapse in the wheat harvest in the U.S. 50% collapse. But it's fine because, well, we still have 50% left, so that's a good thing. And we'll just make up the difference by buying Australian wheat. And maybe the Australians really do have a good harvest and they can supply the extra 50%. But remember, this is a global problem. And so the price of these things, everyone's going to want Australian wheat. Now, the Australian farmers are going to be happy with that. They can bump up the price, right? They can, and whoever can afford the price, they're the ones that get the surplus wheat out of Australia. And maybe not everybody can, and maybe not everybody would pay that price. And so some people won't have, and they'll have whatever they have. And maybe that's not very much. And so all of this boils down to a problem that now we're beginning to talk about. People are beginning to talk about it. We're talking about it a little bit now, a little bit more than they were talking about it, in March and April. Now it's, August, heading into September. People are talking about it a little more, and they're saying, do you remember back in the spring when farmers were supposed to be planting and they didn't? You remember that? Okay, well, now it's harvest time. And so now we're looking at the harvest. We're saying, wait, where's the harvest? Well, don't you remember back in March because they couldn't plant or they refused to, whatever the reason is. And they just took the bailout, so they're not bankrupt. They didn't have to plant. They're not forced to because they can just go to the government and say, it's not going to work for us financially. We're not going to get enough of a harvest to even pay for the labor. We're not going to do it. Okay, and the government said, fine, here's some money. At least you won't go bankrupt. You remember that? You remember all that happening? Well, I remember all that happening. And now it's August, and we're getting close to what should be harvest for some things, like wheat, for example, and seeds that are used for seed oil, and a bunch of other stuff. Staples, right? Staples. Now it's getting into harvest time, and they're remembering. Oh, I remember now. We didn't plant, did we? No, we didn't. We just paid the farmers to not go bankrupt, and we didn't plant. So now we have discussions going on. Now people are talking about, we have a problem. Oh no, it's a global problem. Oh no, we can't solve this problem. And we couldn't have solved it back in March. Because remember, the problem isn't that the farmers just got lazy and decided not to plant. They didn't have the resources they needed. And there is a global heat wave, and the soils are drying out. And if you're doing any kind of dry land farming, then you probably didn't get the rain you needed or expecting. And so even if you did plant, your crops failed, right? And then there's the heat, and then there's the fire, and then there's the smoke, and the smoke does interfere with things. And people are looking at the harvest that's coming up, and they're saying, "Oops, oopsie, oopsie. Do we have a little bit of a problem here? Oopsie." Okay, yeah, yeah, you do. You do. Now, what are we going to do about that? Right now, nothing. So this is the problem of planning. Okay, we don't do that. Nobody plans. Nobody does that because planning, well, it's just not how industrialized agriculture works. Because remember, industrialized agriculture is industry. And how does industry work? Industry works always from month to month, quarter to quarter. Nobody looks more than, a financial quarter away on what's going to be happening. Nobody does that. Oh, there are financial planners, and there are people who do modeling of the financial system and the economic system, but they're just quants. They're academics, and they publish their papers. No one really pays attention at the industrial level, including even at the farm level. No one plans ahead. They just decide immediately right now, am I going to do this or not? And the decision to plant or not plant was made by individual farmers, because we don't really have any more centrally planned economies. China kind of does, but as a rule, to plant or not to plant is made at the individual level. So the farmer sits down at the kitchen table with his wife and maybe family member, and they say, well, I'm not sure. I don't think I'm going to plant this year because, I just did some math, and they can do the math, right? Everybody can do the math. I'm not going to have fertilizer. I've checked the price of fertilizer because we can't get fertilizer out of Kuwait right now. That's what they tell me. I didn't know it came from Kuwait. Who knew? I can't even find Kuwait on a map. But what the broker told me was I'm not going to be able to get fertilizer, and if I do, it's going to cost me 5 times, 10 times as much. So I'm just doing the basic math. Cost of fuel is off the chart. Fertilizer is off the chart if you can get it, and my availability of the water supply is probably okay, but that's an expense, and I have labor expenses, and I have maintenance expenses on the tractor, and I penciled all this out. Can do it, almost do it in your head, right? Because they do this every year. They can almost do it in their head, and they sit down at the kitchen table one night, after dinner and after cleaning up the dishes, and say, I've just been thinking about this, and I am not going to plant. And every farmer in America had that conversation. And some of them decided to plant anyway because, whatever, keeps them busy. And maybe they're thinking they'll be able to make some money somehow. And every country has all their farmers sitting down at the dinner table after the meal and thinking about the math and deciding not to plant. Nobody knew that was happening. Nobody knew that individual farmers at every kitchen table everywhere in the world sat down at some point, probably all within like 4 weeks of each other, made the same decision. And nobody knew that happened. Nobody knew that happened. Because no one's going to ask, well, Show of hands, who's planting this year? No one asked that question because that's not how we do things. We just wait and see what happens. And if it gets sticky, then we allow the price to go up. If it becomes difficult, then we go on the open market and find more food somewhere else. We just figure it's going to work out because it always works out. And now we have a global crisis. And the global crisis isn't just fertilizer, is it? Is it? No, it's not. Because we have another global crisis called global heating. And the heat is global. It's everywhere. Worse some places than others, but it's everywhere. It affects rainfall patterns, and it affects if you get rainfall at all. And even if you get rainfall, if the air above the ground is hot, it sucks all the moisture out of the ground, which you're also not expecting to have happen. And then there's fires, and then the rivers run dry, and then there's the price of things, the price of all these materials. And that's a global problem caused by global heating. And global heating isn't going away. The only thing global heating does is get worse. Now, we've been fighting with global heating in the agriculture sector pretty hard for about 5 years now, certainly since 2023. Things really went off the rails in 2023. Most climate scientists will tell you that. It's gotten worse. And it's going to go off the rails in 2026. It already has. It's not hyperbole. It's not over the top to say that the entire world is on fire, because it feels that way. There are fires everywhere in the U.S. right now. Huge fires. We have already exceeded all the last 10 years for record acreage burned here in the U.S. And also, we have a record Godzilla El Nino coming, which is going to pump even more heat into the Earth system from the ocean. The oceans have been absorbing heat for a long time, and that's a good thing. And now the oceans are dumping the heat back into the atmosphere, which is a bad thing. Okay? But there you go. That's what's happening. You don't have to believe it, but there is an ocean heat wave. And what an ocean heat wave is, when you look at the surface of the ocean is hot. And when the ocean is hot, it's releasing that heat into the atmosphere, along with water, vapor, and a bunch of other things that can now rain down on you as severe weather, which is happening also in the U.S. We've got fires in the western third of the country, and the middle third of the country is being flooded. Okay, so what is that about? Well, that's about a global weather phenomenon. People who are interested in agriculture and food availability are beginning to notice that it didn't work this year. That whole system, that whole just-in-time system, JIT, right? All manufacturing is JIT. So is the agricultural system, which is just another form of manufacturing. Everything is JIT. So since there's no planning, because all it has to be is just in time, that means you don't have to plan. That's why they do these things just in time. If you do everything just in time, then you have no warehouse storage. You have no pipeline where food is stacking up and not moving. If you do everything just in time, then you harvest it from the field or the orchard, and it gets on the truck just in time, and the truck shows up at the warehouse just in time, and the food is processed just in time, and it goes into a can or a bag or whatever just in time, and then it gets delivered to the market just as they need it, just as the shelves empty and something else shows up, and it's all just in time. And when that's how you do things, then you have a brittle system. The system is just brittle. And it can be broken anywhere in there like that. Okay, it can be broken anywhere. And if you don't have... And how can the system be broken? So now let's talk about how this really becomes a massive shit show. The farmers couldn't plant. They chose not to plant. They had diesel, they had their tractors, they had the seed. They could have planted. They chose not to plant. And they made that decision individually. And in the end, nobody planted. No one knew that nobody planted. Because there's nobody checking for that, because that doesn't happen. But nobody planted. And now the U.S. is going to have like a half of a harvest. Then the price of gasoline and diesel and fertilizer shot up. This is going to make it difficult for truckers to operate, for expenses to be kept low, and if it becomes too expensive to drive the truck, like it was too expensive to run the farm equipment, right? The reason we didn't plant was it didn't pencil out. So if driving the truck, given that you get paid a certain amount per mile, and they're not paying enough, and they're not going to change how they pay because they've got control of the truckers. And so the truckers, again, it's a discussion at the dinner table. I don't know. I think I'm going to get a job done at the Home Depot just to weather this, because the price of fuel is too much. My contract to haul doesn't change. It's all determined by a bunch of financial wonks in New York City, and or whatever. And they're not going to change anything. And I could protest and I could complain, but nobody cares what I think. So I just can't drive this year. I'll try to get some gigs, whatever, if they pay. But the price of fuel, it just makes it impossible for me to do things the way I used to do things, because nobody cares what I pay for fuel. And so the trucker at the table decides to go get a job at Home Depot. So the truck is not out on the road. And the truck doesn't show up at the farm just in time. That again, okay? The truck doesn't show up at the farm just in time to take the harvest, just in time to the warehouse, just in time. And so the whole system, which is fragile, and no one's looking at the whole thing because we don't do central planning. Not that would help, by the way. No one's looking at the entire supply chain and saying, holy crap, this is falling apart. No one does that. Nobody does that. Everyone has an individual incentive when they have the discussion at the dinner table. These are dinner table topics, okay? Have a discussion at the dinner table. They make an individual decision not to do it. And when enough people make that decision for the same reasons, because it's global, right? Everyone's making the same decision at the same time over the same topics for the same reason and come to the same conclusion. What else would they do? It just has to work financially. And everyone has a slightly different story, but it's the same story. They can't afford it. You can't afford to drive the truck. If you're going to lose money driving the truck, then don't drive the truck. And if no one cares about you at being financially secure driving your truck at a loss, well, then you have to make sure you take care of yourself. So you don't drive the truck. You park the truck behind the house, you put a tarp over it, and then you go get a job at Home Depot. Or you get a job at someone else's farm who is going to plant and is going to work. So you become a farmhand, and maybe you drive tractor. Okay, so you do something else, but you're not driving the truck. You see, that's the key. It's not that the individual made a decision to preserve themselves financially. No. I mean, that's part of it. But the real thing that's happening here is that there's no truck. And no one looks at that. Nobody cares that there's no truck. They just assume there will be a truck when I need one. I will call a number and a truck will show up, and I don't care who's in it. I don't care whose truck it is, and I don't even, as a farmer, I may not even care how much it costs for that guy to put gas in that truck. There will be a truck. It'll be magic. The magic of capitalism. There will be a truck, and the truck will do the thing just in time, and I don't have to think about that. Well, then there's no truck. Because every trucker made the same decision every farmer did, that it wasn't worth it. Because the price of fertilizer went through the ceiling and became unavailable, and the price of diesel went through the ceiling, and everyone is doing the math on the back of an envelope, right? And they're down at the cafe having their morning cup of coffee at 4:00 in the morning. Wonder if they're going to drive their truck, and they're doing the math, and they're going to say it's going to cost me $800 to fill this truck, and that gets me 2 days, and I have to make $800 in 2 days, and I can't do it. I'm going to lose money just filling up my truck with diesel. So I guess I'll just go home, because there's no sense in me doing that. And so the whole system starts to fall apart. And now here's August. Oh, it's August. Oh, my goodness. August. No one was planning in March for August, were they? No, they don't do that. So now it's August. And, it's like, well, where's the crops? They didn't plant? Well, you knew they weren't going to plant because they told you they weren't going to plant. You just didn't care that they weren't going to plant because you figured someone would figure it out. Well, they didn't plant. And now we don't have a plan? How are we going to figure this out? We can't figure this out? There's really no plan? And if I find the food, then there's no truckers to drive the stuff around the country for me? Wait, hold on. Someone was supposed to fix this. No. Frankly, no. No one is supposed to fix this. This is all individual decisions, because that's how we do things. And everything is just in time anyway. So no one's thinking more than like a week out. And no one's thinking more than a week out. No one's taking responsibility for the whole thing end to end, and it just falls apart. And now you have a food crisis. And nobody knows why. Well, I know why. And now you know why. Okay? It's a bunch of individual decisions, each of which makes sense, each of which is one person looking their finances and deciding, are they going to plant or not? Are they going to run the truck or not? Are they going to hire people at the factory or not? Are they going to have this product on the shelf in the future or not? Because if it's too expensive, why put it on the shelf? And so everyone's making these individual decisions. It's all done just in time in this brittle system of food production, transportation, manufacturing, and delivery. The whole thing is brittle and just in time, and the whole thing is this monumental global dumpster fire at this point. And no one knew that was coming. I mean, you could have predicted it, but no one does that. So now we have a problem. And what's the nature of the problem? The problem becomes a food crisis. Okay. This is a food crisis. This was baked into the cake February 28th. I mean, nobody knew that because nobody looks at that. Nobody does anything globally. Nobody does anything holistically. Nobody does anything with the long term. Everything is just in time. Everything is my personal decision. I make a decision to do or not to do, and everyone makes the same decision. And now you have a food crisis. And no one saw that coming. They didn't. Now they have no answer because they don't. Having an answer at this point would require thinking ahead. And nobody does that. Oh, you think that someone would do that, but they don't do that. Nobody's doing that. Nobody gets paid to do that. Why would you think ahead and try to plan ahead and try to organize all this stuff in advance when no one's getting paid to do that? It's just in time. And when you make a decision to plant, either you do or you don't. And then you call, the government agriculture department and say, I'm not planting this year. And then they write you a check. I don't know how it works. They write you a check and they say, okay, you're not planting. And does anyone who's writing those checks look at the ledger and say, holy smokes, nobody's planting. I run an area. I keep track of 2,500 farmers, and I'm writing like 2,000 checks this year. No one does that. No one sits back and says, writing a lot of checks this year. Well, a lot of people are not going to plant. No, page 2, writing checks. Here I go, writing more checks. Don't want bankruptcies. We've got a farm bill. It's a multi-trillion-dollar part of the federal government here in the U.S. Writing checks because this is what I do, and no one notices that they've just written checks for 3/4 of the farmers in their district not planting. Nobody does that. Nobody does that. They're not paid to do that, and they don't do that. And now you have a food crisis, and everyone's going to be like shocked. How that happened? How could you have avoided it? You've got a global problem, people, and everything that you thought was going to work out in the end just in time, right? Everything you thought was going to work out in the end just in time ain't working out. So how big is this crisis? It's huge. It's enormous. But here's how it works. If you have an enormous global food crisis, because globally things went down the drain with all these individual decisions on what to do and what not to do, just globally it all went down the drain. Here's what happens. Wealthy nations composed of wealthy people can find the food. You can find the food. If the U.S. has a wheat failure of about 50%, okay, so the price of wheat doubles. All right, there's the thing. The price of wheat doubles. Assuming that we are not exporting our wheat to other parts of the world. I mean, we may end up with not even with half. If we end up feeding the rest of the world because they've got money, right? That's how this works. You don't do it out of the goodness of your heart, do you? You do this because they're willing to pay. So if there are some countries like the UK that are willing to pay, well then we don't even have half. We have a third or a quarter because our producers, who once again it's an individual decision. The producer who is not the producer. distributor, who is sending the food to buyers. They do an auction globally. They do an auction, and so there's a bunch of people with a bunch of money, and they all pony up, belly up to the auction stage, and the guy saying, I got 4 million bushels of wheat. What do you bid per bushel on this wheat? Someone bids X, and someone doubles X, and then someone triples X. And pretty soon the auctioneer's like, sold for 4 times X, 4 times over the normal asking price. Okay? Who is that country? Somebody with money. Maybe it's the Saudis, right? Maybe it's the Americans. Maybe it's the French. They add up a lot of money. Some producer had a lot of money. And so they get the wheat at 4X cost, and they bring it back and they mill it into flour, and they produce the goods, the bread, the corn chips, the whatever else they're going to make, the cake mix, and then they sell it to their customers who also have a lot of money, right? This is a wealthy nation. This is how money moves around, folks. The wealthy citizens of that nation look at the price of a loaf of bread and they're like, oh, that's pretty damned expensive. Oh, well, I need it. And they pay for it because they're wealthy. Maybe they don't like the price. Maybe they don't even care about the price. Maybe they don't even look at the price. Maybe they say, oh, loaf of bread. Yeah, I need this. And they just pay for it. And they look at their grocery bill and they're like, wow, I paid a lot of money for a bag of groceries. Oh, well. And they go home and they eat. Now, someone else who wanted to buy that wheat but didn't think they would be able to sell the finished goods at 4 times the price, you see. That's a decision, right? That's an individual decision. They come away from the wheat auction with nothing. So they go back to their country, they go back to their state, whatever, and they start making the things, the flour, the bread, the whatever the finished product is, and they have no wheat. And so they use what they have, and they sell that at some really high price, or they don't sell it at all. And people can't afford it. And then people go hungry. And that's what happens. The people who have money, well, they're fine. And they may not like the amount of money they have to spend for groceries this year, but they'll eat, right? They're not gonna starve and protest. They'll do something else in protest, right? They'll elect a different politician. They'll elect some politician who promises to lower the price of eggs. Whatever, sure, I'll vote for this guy. He promised to do what? What again? Lower the price of eggs? Okay, fine, vote for him. Check. Okay, that's what they'll do. If the price of eggs goes down, great. The price of eggs went down. Wasn't that important anyway, but it went down. I'll take it, right? But the price of eggs doesn't go down, or the price of wheat doesn't go down, or the price of flour doesn't go down, they'll pay for it. They're like, well, that didn't work. I voted that guy in. He didn't change fuck all. Fine, whatever. You still got to go to the store. You still got to fill up the bag with groceries. You still got to come home. You still got to eat. So they do. But they got money. So it works fine. And that's how this actually works. The people with money kind of set the price because they're willing to pay it. There's no one who's not going to pay it because it's food. Right? It's food. It's not the price of an airline ticket. You could say, I'm not gonna pay these extortionate airline ticket fees. I'm not going to fly to France this year. I'm only going to fly once instead of twice. You can protest that, but you can't protest food. Can you? You got to eat. So they pay it. And when the rich are paying for the food at the price, then that's the price. Right? Right. And in the end, watch what happens. The farmer was okay. He didn't have to plant. It was an individual decision to plant. The truck driver's probably okay. Maybe he's not. He may lose his truck, but whatever. He'll work at Home Depot, right? It's just a job. It's just a job. And, and everyone else downstream of all that decision making, they'll just charge more for the products. Pay extra for the wheat, pay extra for the sugar, pay extra for the processing, pay extra for the labor, pay extra for the fuel, pay extra for the electricity, pay extra for the water. Okay, fine. What's the final price of the product? Well, that's an increase, but they'll buy it. And they're right. And so that becomes the price of food. And so when you think, Donald Trump will come in, or whoever it is, right? It's always some populist who comes in and says, I'm going to change the price of X, Y, and Z. You vote for them. Check on the ballot. Yep, that's going to fix the problem. What they don't understand is your problem is not created by politicians. Right? Your problem isn't created by politicians. No. Your problem is created by the global supply chains and the availability and the price of fertilizer and the availability and the price of crude oil and the availability and the price of labor. Right? And what can a politician who says, I'm going to lower the price of X and Y and Z, affordability, what can he do about any of that? He can't do anything about any of that. And so you end up with this multi-tier food crisis where the poor people can't afford the food. The poor producers, like farmers and truck drivers who are part of the just-in-time supply chain, they can't participate, and maybe some of them do go bankrupt. But the point is, the supply chain is broken now. So everything becomes hard to get, hard to even locate. You have to go further out and out to try and find flour or wheat or sugar, or whatever you want to get. And then when it finally makes its way through the food chain, finally, after all the work and all the expense and all the auctions and all the competition and everything else that has to happen, and it finally shows up on the shelf, the price is up 4 times. There you go. And do you think that someone like Donald Trump has any visibility into any of that? Are you kidding me? The guy's a moron. He doesn't understand how anything works. He's never had to shop. He was so surprised by the word groceries. He spent like 2 weeks talking about groceries. Have you ever heard of groceries? Groceries. The price of groceries. He was like, groceries. Now there's a word, groceries. And you can see him when he was talking to people. Yeah, groceries. Price of groceries. Trying to align his elitist life with the idea of going to a store, a grocery store. The grocery store. Do I even know where one is? Could I even go there if I had to? To go to a grocery store and buy groceries by the bag? Is that how it's done? By the bag? You can see him. You can see him processing this, right? And he didn't get it. But he can stand up there and wave his arms around and talk about the woke and the trends and say he's going to lower the price of groceries on day one, because he did do that. He did do that. And it worked. He got elected. It worked. I'll say the same thing next year. Having bombed the Iranians, having closed the Straits of Hormuz, having jacked up the price of crude oil and decreased availability, by the way, and jacked up the price of fertilizers and decreased availability both, and all these other things, he's going to run. He's going to run for his third term. He's going to run for his third term the same way he ran for the second one. I'm going to reduce the price of groceries. And he'll have to, and what was that word again? I am going to claim I'm going to reduce the price of groceries. What are groceries again? Remind me. Groceries, that's the grocery store. That's what people buy when they have to eat. Oh, okay, fine. Well, whatever. It's important? Yeah, it's important to people. They're really complaining about the price of groceries. All right, then. I'm going to claim I'm going to reduce the price of groceries on day one of my third term. And he doesn't even remember this when he ran on for his second term. And guess who else won't remember? All the people that vote for him. And so this is why you can't have nice things. Because none of these people understand the actual challenge. Do they? And the few who understand it won't admit it, that there's a problem, because they're part of the problem. The just-in-time supply chains, the closing of the Straits of Hormuz, the dependence on continuous applications of products derived from crude oil and natural gas, like fertilizers and diesel, the reliance on a predictable and stable environmental climate. That used to be a thing. You used to be able to predict these things. You used to be able to know that if you planted on this day in February, then 2 weeks later on this week in March, there'd be rains would come. You just be able to predict that. Okay, you could do some dry land farming, knowing that this spring rain will come on a particular date. You could do that. Well, now you can't do that anymore. Yes, we can. No, you can't. It's just temporary. No, it's not. And now we have a food crisis. And because the systems that I have spent, an hour now in great labor describing how the systems actually work, where your groceries actually come from, how they get on the shelf, that whole hour discussion, yeah, that's broken. And it can't fix. It can't be fixed. Now, Iran could surrender. They could do what Trump wants and rename the Straits of Hormuz the Straits of Trump. I think that's actually floating around out there, and give it to the U.S. as a territory. That's what the U.S. administration wants. It's out there. It's a meme somewhere that the Straits of Hormuz become a U.S. territory, like Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, right? The Straits of Hormuz become a U.S. territory. That we have an air base there, and we have a military base, and we provide protection for the Straits, and we have, well, that means we have to take them not only from Iran, which is one half, we have to take the Straits from Oman. So that's two countries that have to give up sovereignty over the Straits of Hormuz. But that's okay. We're going to figure that out. We're going to bomb people, starve people, whatever we have to do, right? We're going to get that territory. We're going to rename it the Straits of Trump, and then we'll solve this problem. Okay, even if they do that, we remain dependent on artificial fertilizers, artificial sources of irrigation, artificial fuels like diesel and gasoline, and a just-in-time food supply chain, and a just-in-time everything supply chain, including fuels and fertilizer. And everything is just in time. And then your resulting food supply is also just in time. There's no storage. No one wants to hold on to anything. You hold on to things, they spoil. Plus, if you're holding on to something, it's sitting there in a warehouse, it's money. Move it. And if you have too much to move, have less next time. Don't hold on to things. They go bad, they get stolen, they whatever. They catch fire. You don't want to store things. Move it. Move it. Get it out of here. That's the just-in-time basis of the just-in-time economy. And we can't solve any of that at this point. All I can do is collapse. And that's how civilization collapses. Right? We've built up all these compromises for maximum efficiency, maximum profit, minimum gearing, no storage, no waste of time, no waste of energy. Everything is just in time. And by doing that, we've created a brittle system. And now the brittleness of the system is in evidence. And does any of that change? No. Oh, except that the system can actually collapse, which it will do. We're now in the process of seeing that. How long does it take? I don't know. A year? Starting in February. So maybe this February, right? I'm just round figures, right? A year, yeah, a year of this. Yeah, sure, why not? That's a full agricultural cycle, right? We've gone from spring 2026 when we decided not to plant. Now it's spring of 2027. And are they going to be able to plant? Did global heating go away? No. Did we open the Straits of Hormuz? Probably not. Did the price of things reduce? Did Kuwait fix all of their fertilizer production facilities? No. Did anyone step in to provide fertilizer instead of Kuwait? No. So a year from February of 2026, it's 2027, and nothing has changed. And all the supply chains are still just in time. And now we have a food crisis. We've had one for a year in the making, and now it's just gotten even worse. Because, there was some stuff in storage, right? You could go to some Midwestern farms and find some wheat in a silo, and that got bought up, and now it's not there. And since there was no planting, it's not going to be replaced, and the silos are empty. And now when you go running around looking for wheat in the Midwest, the silos are empty because most of the farmers didn't even bother planting. And whatever they did plant, it didn't go in a silo. They sold it to somebody who needed food. And so they sold it and went on the open market and they sold it. And there's nothing in the silos because they sold it all. Sold it. Pay. Auction. Pay. And by this time next year, there's no buffer. And now what? Because nothing changes between now and February of next year. I mean, very little changes. How can it? How can it possibly? Because you're not solving global heating. And you're probably not solving the fertilizer crisis because Iran bombed Kuwait into the Stone Age and destroyed their processing capabilities. And the Straits of Hormuz could still be closed. There you go. And what was it? Sal Mercogliano tells us for every week, something like I have to go look it up. For every week that the Straits of Hormuz are closed, you've got a month of downtime, just trying to get everything sorted out and fixed. So even if they sort this out and fix this in September, October, how likely is that? 0. There's no likelihood of that happen. Then by February, okay, we're still in the weeds, right? So how does any of this get fixed? It don't. And once it don't, and once that failure to address the problem, which no one's going to do, no one sees this as a personal problem. It's a global problem, therefore it's not a personal problem. So no one is incented to fix it. And since they won't be incented to fix it, they won't fix it. And so it'll go into February of next year broken. And it will stay broken. And as it stays broken, more parts of other systems also break. And pretty soon we have collapse of economies, collapse of sovereign nations. We have starving populations, can't get enough food. Plus are dealing with global heating, right? Lack of water, lack of electricity, rivers running dry. And you think, oh, well, that's not true. You're making that up. Well, the hell I am. The only nuclear power plant in Hungary closed last week. Probably permanently. Because the Danube ran out of water. The Danube River, one of the great rivers of Europe, ran out of water. Huh. So they had to close down their nuclear power plant. Huh. That was in the news. Did you notice that? I noticed that because I pay attention to things like that. Because I know what's happening. I know what's coming. Yeah, just gets worse, folks. And they may not be able to restart that power plant forever. Ever. And the longer it sits without operating, the more difficult it becomes to maintain. And then they stop maintaining it. And then it falls into ruin. And they decommission it. And there's no nuclear power plant in Hungary because the Danube ran out of water. You see? And who's paying attention to any of that? Nobody. Everybody's making individual decisions about all of this. And you're at the far, far end of all that. You're at the far end of the conveyor belt of decisions that everybody had to make individually. And there's no planning, and there's no centralized anything. It's just everybody sitting down at the kitchen table deciding to plant or not to plant, to drive the truck or not to drive the truck, to process the poultry or not process it, to go out of business, to not do it again this year. All the animals died last year because of the heat. Don't have any animals this year. I'm not sure I'm going to restart my herd, restart my flock. Don't know how I'm going to do this. Individual decisions at the kitchen table, everybody deciding not to do it anymore. Because it doesn't pencil out, because it doesn't make profit. It doesn't make sense. All these individuals not going to do it because it doesn't make sense on an individual basis. So they don't. So they don't. And they don't. And it doesn't happen. And everybody's wondering, why is there no food? There won't be. And there won't be an answer. And the next populist who comes up and says, the price of groceries, the price of eggs, we're going to fix this on day one. 24 hours, signature, I can fix this problem. Okay? They can't fix it. No. No, they can't fix this. People will still vote for them. Check on the ballot. Yep. Gonna fix my grocery bill. Yeah, and 6 months later, he can't even tell you what word groceries means. Your groceries? Well, what is that? Is that has anything to do with shoes, footwear? What are groceries? Have something to do with the tires for your car? What are you talking about here? Groceries. He's an oligarch. He's a rich guy. He's an elite. He doesn't know about groceries. His meals are prepared for him by a chef who does all his shopping for him. He just shows up at home, and there's a big table 20 feet long and 4 feet wide, and there's all these people sitting around it, half of whom he doesn't even know, but they're important people. And he sits down, and he eats his big meal, and he's doing all this. And if he wants lunch, he sends somebody out to get his KFC or his McDonald's, and that shows up, and he eats that. He doesn't know anything of this stuff. They don't know any of this stuff. They don't know any of this stuff. You don't know it either. So it's easy just to say, vote for me and I'll fix your grocery problem. Vote, cast your ballot, wait for the groceries to be fixed. It doesn't get fixed. And no one understands why it's broken. And because you don't understand how it works and you don't understand how it's broken, then you don't understand why it can't be fixed. And it won't be. And now there's a food crisis. And it's global. And it's probably not going away. Maybe we'll get lucky in 2027. I doubt it. There's no indication that we're going to get lucky because there's no luck involved, right? It's all physics at this point. It's planting, it's trucks, it's fertilizer, it's materials, right? The physical things. It's not politics, economics, religion. It's just real things in the real sense, tangible objects that can be shipped and sold and planted and harvested and manufactured and processed and delivered, and the shelves and the credit cards and all this stuff. All that is real. All that's the real world of real things, actual physical things, brick and mortar things, right? All the real world of things. And politics, economics, and religion is completely divorced from reality. And no one noticed that you can't fix the price of groceries or the availability by voting for a presidential candidate. Nobody noticed because they didn't understand. Yes, there's a food crisis coming. Well, it's probably here. You just didn't notice. Well, you may have noticed the price of a bag of groceries. Notice that, but you don't notice how that's connected to the food crisis. Because no one's talking about that. You don't notice how it's tied to the price of diesel for trucks, having to move this stuff around, which is a physical thing. No one really knows where the food comes from, or why it wasn't planted, or why it wasn't harvested, or why all the chickens died, and why all the cattle had to be culled. Nobody recognizes that it was too hot to have animals. No one recognizes that it was too dry to plant. Nobody understands any of this. It's all real. It's really happening. And no one notices. No one talks about it. And no one cares. Because it's always worked in the past. And that's your normalcy bias. And that's people accusing me of being a fearmonger or whatever it is I do here. And nope, not a fearmonger. Just calling them as I see them. Okay? And people will never understand. They won't. They'll never understand. And they'll blame the woke, and they'll blame the immigrants, and they'll blame the people eating the cats and dogs, and they'll blame somebody, and they'll demagogue, and they'll hang people from lampposts, and they'll do all this stuff, and they'll never understand. The food will never come back. They didn't know where the food came from. They don't know why it went away, and it will never come back. And it doesn't matter how many immigrants you deport to Mexico. It doesn't matter how many woke activists you throw in maximum security prison. None of that will fix your problem. None of that will fix your problem. And the next time a politician shows up and says, I will fix the price of groceries, and I will fix the price of eggs, and you vote for that guy, and you throw your ballot in the slot, and you walk away waiting for the price of groceries to change, and you don't know why it didn't, and now you're mad because the system doesn't listen to you. And so you're going to vote for the next guy who says the same thing because you're mad and you're waiting for someone to listen to you. You don't understand. People just don't understand. They don't. They don't understand the first part of it. They don't understand the first part of it. And why would they? It's complicated. It's remote. It's someone else's problem. It's an SCP, right? And it's JIT, and it's all the other things. There's a food crisis. And from here on, probably there will always be a food crisis. And that's one of the reasons we can't have 8,000 million humans on Earth. And the actuaries are already predicting that because we can't have 8,000 million, we're going to have something less than that. 4,000 million, maybe 2,000 million, maybe less than that. My claim, using a different type of math based on biology, my claim is that we can't have more than about, at most, 80 million humans on Earth, maybe as few as 8 million. 80 million is 1% of the current population. We can feed that many. Given global heating and supply chain interruptions and everything else, we can feed about 80 million people, 1% of the current population. Maybe less. And the worst case scenario was probably 8 million. So 1/10 of 1%. Somewhere in there, between 1% and 1/10 of 1% is probably the answer to what we can have on this planet. And we'll all be in agriculture at that point. So if you wanted to start being in agriculture, if you've got a backyard, and if you got a front yard, and if you've got a shovel, and if you can pull up the yard and the grass, and if you've got water, and if you've got seeds, and if you've got the time, and if you've got the concern, and if you care, and if you're paying any attention to any of this, well then maybe you can start to grow some food. Maybe. And my guess is maybe 1/10 of 1% of the people of the earth are prepared to do any part of that, including owning land. Having access to land that isn't in the commons, like the public park. Access to land behind your fence, okay, with water that comes from your water meter, right? You doing all this, then you've got a story you could talk about. And that's maybe 0.1% of the global population. That's the 8 million who can at least have a story about feeding themselves. Will it work? Yeah, maybe. For some people it will work. Yeah, I hope. And the time is coming when we all have to make that decision. And if you live in an apartment, then the decision is made for you. And if you rent the house you're living in, then the decision has been made for you. And if you live in a city that has zoning ordinances against growing food or having chickens, then the decision has been made for you. And it's going to be a cascading set of decisions that maybe you get to make some of them, and maybe you don't. Maybe you don't. And if you live in Phoenix, Arizona, or Las Vegas, Nevada, or anywhere in Southern California, the decision has been made for you by nature. You got no water. It's too hot. No matter what you want to do, it's not going to work. And, that could be most of humanity at some point. Most of humanity the nature may make the decisions. And the decision is no. No. Yeah, you want to plant? You have no earth. And your earth has been depleted. And now you have no water. And soon it'll be too hot. And the crops will come up, but there'll be nothing there. It'll all wither and die. So no. No, the answer is no. No, 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 no. And that's global heating. It just says no. And Donald Trump can promise you fix the price of eggs on day one. No. No. Well, why not? He could legislate executive order, like the king. Sign an executive. There's no chickens to lay the eggs. That's where eggs come from. People don't even know that. I mean, they know that kind of in theory, but they don't know that. And Donald Trump can't create an entire flock of chickens in the Midwest living in warehouses with no air conditioning where it's 145 degrees inside. He can't sign that away. He can sign something, but he can't sign that away. He can't change the fact that it's 145 degrees inside the barn where the chickens are supposed to be laying eggs. The chickens are all dead. He's not God. He can't sign that away. Just proclaim it solved. Solving. He can't do that. He can't do that. It's too hot. It's a hoax. I'm signing something right here that says it's a hoax. Yeah, it's a hoax. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, it's a hoax, you fucking moron. Sign another executive order. Chickens everywhere, laying eggs for everybody. Groceries. Whatever. You've got a just-in-time dumpster fire, you moron. Yeah. What are you going to do? His solution is to declare it a hoax. Just wave his hand and tell anybody who talks about it they're a domestic terrorist. You're gonna get thrown into a maximum security prison. And that Cougar guy, yeah, he's going to be first in a maximum security prison because he did all this unhappy stuff, that it was all physics and that I don't have the power to sign away the price of eggs. I don't have the power to fill the warehouses with chickens laying eggs. Yeah, you don't, Don. Nobody does. The Chinese government, the Russian government, nobody can do that because that's physics. Well, you think you're going to sign an executive order and all of a sudden there's going to be warehouses in the Midwest full of living chickens laying eggs for people? That's how we're going to do this? No, you're not. No, you're not. You're not doing that. I mean, you can do that, but that's not going to work because of physics. Well, I've enjoyed this, and yeah, FAFO people, you're going to find out. You're going to find out. Okay, good luck finding out. Got a comment in here. Hello, Cougar. Pleasure to hear you. I'm stockpiling tons of dry cat food for my cats and seeds and fruits for myself. Fine. Do that. That's a smart thing to do. It's a start, right? It's a start. And then you have to find your community, other people with cats or whatever, children. The people have to eat. And then you have to work together and you have to form, dare I say it? Oh no, I'm going to say the word. Oh no. Communes. Communal living. Oh no, he's talking about communism. No, I'm not. That's an ism. Okay, I'm talking about communes, how people used to live. Village life. You're gonna have to form village life. I'm gonna have to live. I'm gonna get cooties. I'm gonna have to look at people. I'm gonna have to talk to people about planting our crops and our planting and how we're gonna get the water from. And someone has to go down to the river with the truck and fill up the truck with river water and bring it back to irrigate our crops in our backyards. Oh no! Communism? Oh no! I'd rather die. Okay, well then you will. Someone has to go first. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, fine. All you can do is die now because you can't possibly live in communism or communally, which is almost the same thing, right? You can't form villages and work with people and collaborate and share skills and get through the hard patches and look after each other and raise each other's children and take care of each other's elders. You can't do that? Well, then you get to die. I mean, someone has to. We can't go from 8,000 million to 80 million without a 99% die-off. So guess what? We need volunteers. Volunteers. We need volunteers. So go, fine. You got to volunteer? Good. My admonition when in these videos is always the same. I don't know how you're going to figure it out. You might not. I don't know who's going to help you figure this out. Probably nobody. I don't know when you're going to realize that you're at the end of the rope. However much rope nature gave you personally, however much rope your community had, however long that rope was, however strong it was, okay, that just-in-time rope that we are all at the end of. I don't know when you run out of rope or how it looks to you when you get to the end of your rope, all right? My admonition is always the same. Don't die. That's all I got. Don't die.